Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and this video is going to be a little bit different. In this video, I want to talk more about Shadowlands, which is an expansion I feel a lot of us are very excited for. A lot of us, whether you're waiting for BFA to be over or for Shadowlands to be up, either way you slice it, it's an exciting time. But one of the things I'm hoping for Shadowlands is going to be what abilities are going to be coming back to classes and what class redesigns we might see. In this video, I want to explore some of the old school abilities that we used to have in previous expansions. As we know, Blizzard wants to bring some older abilities back to the game. Things like allowing mages to all have access to Polymorph, Frozen Nova, but also maybe abilities like Blizzard and Arcane Explosion and Fire Blast. So you really feel like a master of the mage rather than just a fire mage or frost mage. So could Blizzard essentially bring back certain talents or even abilities that we have used in previous expansions? And how could Blizzard maybe modify them to fit more the current standard for how the classes play right now? And that's what I really want to try to explore in this video. It's honestly going to be more for fun, but also just my own theory crafting of what cool mechanics could we add back into the game that I remember and how could we modify them in more interesting ways. We'll start this video off with some of the more popular choices that people have requested for, like Protection Warriors and Gladiator stance. If you didn't play in Warlords of Draenor, then I am so happy for you because that expansion had nothing good about it unless you were a Protection Warrior, and then you loved the talent of Gladiator stance. Glad stance was something cool. It basically allowed a Protection Warrior to forego any tanking capabilities by removing their active mitigation of shield block and replacing it with a shield charge, where they now could charge at the enemy. Gladiator stance would also increase your overall damage output by 5%. But even if you didn't want to go into Gladiator stance, just picking the talent for Gladiator stance gave you 5% extra tankiness if you were in defensive stance. The big caveat to the ability of Gladiator stance was you either were in it or out of it, and you couldn't swap in combat. So before a fight began, you would get in your stance, and once you were in combat, you couldn't go back to tankiness to try to maybe choose like a PvP encounter or a dungeon encounter. But what if they added something like this into the game? In Battle for Azeroth, we saw quite a lot of healers create a battle stance to them in terms of like, you're a healer, but you're kind of there to do damage. You're just there to throw out like a utility or two. Battle Shamans were pretty popular pretty early on. Battle Shamans were restoration shamans with basically every trait for damage increases from the elemental shaman. That means your lava burst did more damage and you cast quite a bit of lightning bolts. And the only thing you really did as Battle Shaman is heal your allies with powerful cooldowns or go for emergency healing when more healing was required, but your primary job was to add extra damage to get through certain boss fights. So essentially, couldn't you do this for tanks as well? Have, let's say, an extra tank on your roster that might have some sort of utility to allow their allies to take advantage of while still being there purely mostly for damage. Let's say just being able to taunt an extra target and take a few hits as a Protection Warrior in Gladiator stance could be useful in some raid situations. And I feel like that versatility would be kind of fun to play with. Speaking about versatility, let's talk about Holy Priests and Chakras. Right now, priests have access to all the different holy words that they have. There's one for AoE healing, there's one for single target healing, and there's one for offensive damage, Holy Word Chastise. Each holy word allows the priest to utilize one of those words in order to save a party, save a tank, or maybe crowd control an enemy while dealing quite significant amount of damage. Back in Mists of Pandaria, priests were actually limited to one holy word depending which chakra they were in. And in a sense, chakras were kind of like a stance for priests. You had a DPS stance, where your shadow and holy abilities did more damage, and you got the offensive holy word. You had the AoE healing chakra that gave you the holy word for AoE healing and amplified anything that does AoE in terms of party healing. Great for dungeons, and it was also great for raids if you were there for group healing rather than tank healing. Of course, there's also another chakra, final one, single target healing, where your abilities would actually refresh the duration of renewal, which made maintaining tanks a lot easier. Now, back in MoP, priests could kind of willy-nilly swap between the chakras, but what if they made these chakras a lot stronger in the next expansion and gave them like a cooldown? Like, similar to the Gladiator stance with the warrior, at the very beginning of the fight before combat, you get to choose which chakra you want to start in. So a less experienced healer can maybe start in like a safe chakra to just do AoE healing to the party members in a dungeon, while a more experienced can start in damage chakra and just unload damage on a boss. Once real mechanics kick in and healing is needed, they could swap it to a chakra, which can maybe put them all on some short cooldown or a long cooldown maybe, and do output of massive amount of healing. It would create a playstyle of like risk reward. If you are in the right chakra and you know how to use it properly, you can definitely take advantage of this situation and help out your team. However, not knowing the fight or knowing how your class works can definitely be to your team's detriment. You can even make it easier for them to play this playstyle by leaving all the holy wars to priests so they can use them in any of the chakras, but like a stance dancing and stances mattering, I think could be something cool and unique to bring back to the game. Some of the other abilities we'll be talking about are not even as expansive or detailed as the ones we've talked about so far. I feel like I've been kind of almost rambling about the other abilities, but it's pretty interesting mechanics and quite in depth to talk about them. Some of the other abilities I've seen, and I agree with, is something like a gust of wind for shamans. Shamans with the ability to have like a small jump where the wind would just kind of carry you a little bit further forward, allowed shamans quite a bit of verticality, and being able to get out of abilities that would otherwise kill you was quite cool. Also, it was very enjoyable to kind of try to juke enemies out in arenas as a shaman, make them think that you're about to jump off of the bridge so they chase after you, and then you gust your wind yourself back up and kind of watch them run around circles trying to get back to you. Not the most exciting ability, but I thought it was fun, so something like this back in the game could be quite cool, and Blizzard could even modify how far you go or even the cooldown of it. Another ability I thought was really cool is Shadow Priest Spectral Guise. Now, Spectral Guise was a really cool ability that basically gave you short-term stealth for Shadow Priest. Shadow Priest has always been a class that attacks the mind of the enemy, so how else do you attack the mind but, you know, play around with the mind and do some mind tricks? Shadow Priest would fade into obscurity and leave an image, kind of like a training dummy for enemies to attack. The enemy thinks that that's the priest, but the real priest is actually sneaking around the dummy. You could use this in multiple ways. Usually to try to distract an enemy while you sneak away from them, or to create a dummy for them to hit while they're popping off their cooldowns while you're trying to avoid as much of the damage as possible. It gave Priest a little bit of a playstyle option to it, and with some of the new trinkets we got for PvP, I feel like something like this would really be cool thematically to come back. There's a lot of things that you could do with hunters and traps, and hunters have had a variety of different traps back in the day. Hell, Blizzard is even messing around with some trap ideas from the Covenant abilities. Like, hunters get a trap based on the Covenant, and if they get Kyrian as their Covenant, they actually get a trap that if the enemy, let's say, walks behind the pillar and they trip it, then all your abilities actually go to that enemy through any line of sight, which could be useful in arenas. I don't really have that many uses that I could see in terms of dungeon content, unless you're just straight up trying to line of sight your enemy and line of sight a cast. But something like this could be cool, and the idea of them experimenting with more traps definitely could come up. Although, from my research, I haven't really been able to read a lot of good ideas. And as a hunter not main, I can't really think of them at the top of my head. So what are some of the trap ideas do you guys think that Blizzard could potentially implement? Some older traps, but maybe some cool new ideas. I feel like stances for warriors could come back. We talked about stances, but let's talk about warriors and stances. Blizzard said in the past that they would like for warrior stances to come back as well, and they could do so much to explore. We have so many different mechanics that we could modify for stances. One of the things that I like about the idea of stances is flip-flopping in stances to have impactful decisions of how these offenses affect your damage or maybe survivability. One of the things I didn't like about stances is kind of like the idea of the limitations, like, hey, you got stabbed by the rogue, hopefully you're in Berserker stance so you can Zerker Rage out of it. Hey, are you fighting a caster? Well, hopefully you're in Protection stance in order to reflect an ability. I think Blizzard could really take away the part that makes stance dancing maybe annoying in this current version of WoW, where your abilities are linked to a stance that you're in, and always having to remember which ability has which stance would just be people making a load of macros if they ever want to use a specific ability. But I feel like you could come back with stances as maybe a unique arms warrior or all warrior mechanic and give some sort of benefits to the warriors. Let's say have one stance where whenever you take AoE damage, you generate a lot of rage. So in raid fights, if you're able to maximize the value of rage generation, let's say the boss just starts thrashing around the room, you pop that stance, you get a bunch of rage from all these AoEs going out, now you're fully loaded to do more damage to the boss. And then you could have other stances where, let's say, critical strikes give you more rage. or auto attacks give you a very little amount of rage, and the warrior can kind of choose and decide, depending on their build, how much rage they want to have. And you can still maintain these mechanics where a geared and well-versed warrior could maximize the value of their spec and get the most out of it. They could even make it more about the damage you output rather than the rage generation that you have. However Blizzard does it, I feel like there is a lot of possibility of how they could interact with stances and how they could bring him back without really making him as limited and limiting as they were in previous expansions. Now, you might have noticed that I didn't mention some of the obvious things that I think Blizzard should bring back, like let's say poisons for all rogues, or Spirit Beast for hunters, or maybe Shattering Throw for warriors, but that's because Blizzard already said that stuff like that is coming back. They had a whole list of different abilities that they want to bring back for Shadowlands, and there was things like Army for the Death Knight. That means every single Death Knight getting Army back as a primary cooldown. Hell, even being able to summon a undead minion was going to come back for all 3 specs, and I'm pretty sure undead will still be the only spec that gets to keep their minions, while Frost and Blood will probably have them be there for extra damage, but on like a cooldown, and they don't survive too long. So things like this, I decided not to mention in this video because Blizzard themselves already stated that yeah, stuff like that is going to be coming back. All the obvious things are going to make it. So I wanted to talk about some of the other abilities that other people have suggested, some of the more unique concepts and maybe even popular, very much wanted abilities. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see what Blizzard is going to be bringing to Shadowlands. I just wanted to talk about more possibilities in case those weren't reintroduced back into the game just yet. Cannot wait to see what Shadowlands Alpha has to offer us. I heard that some people already have access to it. I heard that some people have said that it's playable, but no one actually gets to play it. So with this conflicting information, we just don't really know until Blizzard says something about it. I'm hoping PAX East will give us a little bit more of an insight, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But thank you guys so much for checking out this video. I really do hope you guys enjoyed. You guys let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see all of you in another video.